Good evening, everyone. I welcome you all. Simon Jacobs is my name. I welcome the web audience as well. Tonight I shall talk down to you. For those on the web, they can't really see that because the camera is on my, it's probably even, but you guys. So we'll give you a dose of condescension. How's that? You ever have anyone talk down to you? Never had that in your life? Okay. Well, I haven't had it. It's not pleasant. The first time that anyone ever talked down to someone actually was God. He went up on Mount Sinai and talked down to the people, gave them the 10 Commandments. And ever since, religion has had the stereotype of being talked down to. But you see, God is entitled to do so because he has a little seniority over all of us. He's been around longer, created us. So I guess the Creator can pull rank. But the rest of us are all in the same boat on this earth. We're all created in the divine image. As you know, the recurrent theme that I always discuss. And as such, we don't have a right to talk down to each other because each of us has our own strengths and our own blessings. Now that Maya has entered, I want to dedicate the class again to your father, your dear father. Levi ben Yehuda and Batsheva. I also dedicated last week's email. I don't know if you saw that to him as well. For Shlema for the mother. What's the name? Miriam Bas Tzipora. Oh, very biblical names. Very biblical. Miriam Tzipora. Miriam is Moses' sister. Tzipora is Moses' wife. So that's good. So this class is dedicated in honor of your father, Neshama, and for Shlema for your mother. May she be well. And I was talking about, what was I talking about? Talking down to people. Okay, so bottom line is that we are all equal. That doesn't mean we're all the same. Each of us has our unique contributions, our unique qualities and virtues. But we are all, like, as I often share, complementary indispensable musical notes in one large composition. With each note absolutely necessary and each note needing all others. So if you think of it this way, 6 billion people on this planet and counting, 6 billion and whatever the number is as we speak, each one another musical note. And as the Talmud says, and this is actually an interesting mystical concept that only can be understood according to Kabbalah, that each one of us has a dimension of the divine that no one else has. In other words, even though there's one God, but this oneness, like the rainbow, like a prism, think of it like a prism. So though white light is the essential light, but a prism can bend the light and turn it into so many different colors. So think of an infinite prism, where each of us is another color, another hue, another reflection of another aspect of the divine. So for us to really get a picture of the divine wholeness and the divine unity, we need each other, because each of us reveals another aspect of the divine mystery that another does not. And that's really the story of your soul and its journey, which gives it also a very profound level of dignity. That your life, as it plays itself out, and of course it's your choice whether to live up to this destiny or not. We'll talk about that in a moment. But your life, as it plays itself out, is playing out a certain aspect of the divine drama that only you and only you can play out, because only you were given that part of you. Which is why we say no two faces are alike, no two people think alike, no two personalities are alike. Even if we carry the genes of our parents, even identical twins are not exactly identical, let alone the rest of us, brothers and sisters. So even if we carry similar genes, just the gene pool, a combination of a different father and mother from two different families, even the children, brothers and sisters, are not completely alike, even though we share many similarities. And it basically breaks into a diverse, infinite diversity. How many people have lived through history? If we have 6 billion people on the planet today, and you add the millions and billions that have lived before us, you're talking about maybe trillions and trillions of people. Who knows the number? Let's not say trillions, let's say a trillion, whatever the number may be. In each one, another reflection of another dimension of the divine story. So you think of it that way, then your life really matters. and how you make your choices matter. Because you can choose to either fulfill and realize that divine story, or you can choose to ignore it and be busy with your own agenda, with your own short-term or instant gratification agenda, without really thinking about what mark you're leaving in this world. So when your soul comes down to this earth, the way this is fundamental Jewish thought, based on the Bible, definitely based on the mystical teachings, your soul was plucked willingly by God from a particular part of the big tree in heaven where divine souls hang. It was plucked from that tree and sent to this earth for a particular mission to play out a particular story. The thing is, as opposed to a musical note which doesn't have any free will, it just plays the music based on the composer or the musician playing the instrument, we have free will. As one of the great thinkers said, we must believe in free will, we have no choice. So we have free will, which means you have free will to determine whether you're going to play out your story or you're going to get distracted and be seduced by the temptations of this world. So it's a pretty stark and black and white option that we have every second of our lives. I know many of us don't like to think like that. We like the gray area where you can say a little good, it's not so good, it's almost good, perfect, nobody's perfect. I know but none of us are perfect. But still, we do have this choice every minute, whether the opportunities that come our way, the people we meet, the events that happen, are you going to use them just for personal and selfish gain, or are you going to use them to serve and do something for others and leave a mark in this world that will fulfill the divine mission for which you were sent here. So that's like somewhat of an introduction to this class, to every class I give, but specifically tonight we're going to speak about a particular topic in this spirit. It's called, we titled the class, Your Fiery Spirit. What has happened? How did I put it? Where has your fiery spirit gone? Something like that. Yeah. What happened to your fiery spirit? Reigniting your flame. Very good. And I remember I worded it a particular way. And the reason I decided to talk about this topic is, well, it's always a good topic to speak about. And I always like to talk about things that make us feel nostalgic, like I think it does. Nostalgia, as they say, is not like it used to be. So we all dream and sometimes remember how we were when we were a little younger, when we wore a younger man or younger woman's clothes, and especially our personalities and our dreams and aspirations. But particularly this week, we read this week in the Torah, it's the end of the book of Exodus, it's the last chapter of Pekudei. So the conclusion of the book, but we also have a special reading, and that is the reading of Parsha Shkolim, because it's the beginning of the month of Adar, second Adar this year, because it's a leap year, which is the month of Purim. So in the beginning of Adar, the custom in the temple was, the mitzvah was, when they would gather the Shkolim were special coins, shekel, like in Hebrew today, the shekel. They gathered Shkolim, a certain coin, in the biblical times, in the temple times, that every person gave a half a shekel toward the offerings in the temple. We commemorate that custom actually before Purim, Erev Purim usually, when it's a fast day, the fast day of the fast of Esther. This year, because Purim is Sunday, that day will be on Thursday. So that day, during the afternoon, there's a custom with the half shekels and so on. So we read about the shekel. What is the shekel? It's an earlier chapter. We read about how God tells Moses, Zeh Yitnu, this is what you should give, l'chaper al nafshech seichem, to heal and to atone for your souls. And a famous medrash which I have discussed here in previous years, where Moses said to God, what can atone for a soul? How can you atone for a soul? And how can you expect a coin, just a plain money, should atone for the soul? And God said, Zeh Yitnu, He showed him what's called a matbei shalesh, a fiery coin, a coin made out of fire, a coin looking like fire. And He says, that's what you should give, this fiery coin. So that's what evoke the topic of this class. What is the significance of this fiery coin? As we shall discuss, this is really a symbolic of our fiery souls, and that's why the coin has the power. The coin has the power to actually reignite your soul, and l'chapar nafshesechem, to atone for or to heal a soul. And we shall discuss that a little more as we go along here. I just wanted to ground it and explain why this theme, it's not just random, has a connection to what we're reading in the Torah this week. So, with that being said, someone raised their hand. Somebody wanted to ask something?
Well, earlier you were saying about a little part of a cosmic chorus or cosmic art, and I just thought that music and art have tragic notes also that have to be in the composition. Does God? My mother, she's older, and she's going through some terrible pain, and she's she's working on it, but it's hard. And sometimes she just has this look of like, what do I do? What do I do? And what am I supposed to? How do I go beyond this? And I said to her, for my God, I said, look, Mom, you'll have good days and you'll have bad days, but somehow this fits into the plan. Your suffering does have a purpose. I don't know what that purpose is, but I don't know if I was speaking the truth there.
Okay. Well, we often don't say the truth to our parents, so it's all right. I'm just kidding. Actually, listen, I'm very glad. I'm not glad to hear about the situation, but I'm happy that you brought it up because I think it's very relevant, and I'm glad I asked you to ask your question. And I'll repeat it just for the record, just for those that may have not heard you say it. The question that was asked here was, this young man, this gentleman, his mother's suffering greatly, right? And in a musical composition, as in art, yes, it's true that there are many different musical notes, but some of them are tragic notes. And in a way, they're also part of the composition. So your question to me was, is it correct to what you said to your mother, that though we may not understand what the reason for it is, but it's part of a bigger picture? So I think you're absolutely right. I don't know if everything you said to your mother in your life is as true as that, but that is definitely true. And I want to share a story, and it's a very good point you make, because it's not just with your mother, it's also all of us in our lives. Even though we're a musical note, our musical note through life is not always the same. There are different stages and different cycles we each of us go through, let alone other people. So I will say the following. It was after my book was published, Toward a Meaningful Life, a woman told me the story that happened with her and her mother. Very similar to what you're describing. A little different, but she was from Chicago, this woman, and her mother was living in Toronto. And her mother was dying of a terminal illness, and doctors had given up hope, and she was in a lot of pain. They were coming already a point where they were asking her to sign, a DNR, and just stop with the medications and just give up and finish with her life. And she was ready to do that because she was suffering greatly, and they had given up anyway on her. So just a matter of prolonging the agony was the point. Her daughter would come to her often from Chicago to Toronto, the hospital where she was, to spend time with her and try to help her get through the difficulties and the pain and so on. And here's the story. Here's the interesting thing. We have, please come in. You have their seats. You have seats over there. So one of the times she came to visit her, her mother was telling her that she's not feeling good about staying alive. She's just too much pain. And her daughter would talk to her about different things. At that time, she happened to bring along with her, the book Toward a Meaningful Life, my book, that I had the honor of writing and publishing. And she was reading to her. She asked her mother, what would you like me to read, about what topics? So her mother asked her to go through the different table of contents and so on. So she went through the table of contents, and her mother was an educator in her professional life. So she said, why don't you read the chapter on education? And being that she was also going through this suffering. There was also a chapter on pain and suffering. So there you go. My book covers all the musical notes you like. From joy to suffering, from birth to death, the whole thing, the whole gamut. And she's reading to her the sections, and she says to me two things jumped out that her mother responded to that changed her life, as you'll hear in a moment. Number one, reading the book chapter on education, she was reading some quotes where it says there that education is not just teaching children and students knowledge. It's not just imparting information. It's about shaping life, that a true teacher shapes lives. And if every teacher had that attitude, education would have a whole different meaning. And chinuch in Hebrew is not just about learning information, learning facts, learning rules, learning systems. It's about shaping lives from young age all the way through life, and that education never ends. Even though formal education may end at a certain point, the element of shaping a life never ends. That means your teacher could impact you the rest of your life, even though you're out of school. Doesn't mean every teacher does so, but real education, that's what real education is. That was one thing that touched her deeply. I'll get back to that in a moment. And the second thing was in the chapter on pain and suffering, one of the things I explained there is that when you look at your life like a list, you list your life, the events in your life. Often, you make two columns. One column, all the happy and good things that happen to you. Another column, all the tragic, sad things that happen, your losses and your gains. Often, the second list will be longer than the first list. The difficult challenges in life sometimes outnumber the positive ones. So if you think about it from a quantitative point of view, mathematically, business-like, you could say, hey, not worth it. Life is not worth it because it cancels out. If I have 10 positive things and I have 30 negative, or 100 positive and 300 negative, it's like it's a deficit. That's quantity. But if you think of life as qualitative, as one long film with many frames, and that there's a higher purpose that runs through a undercurrent that's like a hidden script that runs through all your life, and not as quantitative different frames, then everything is not measured of how many good things and how many bad things. It's all part of one big picture. Like if you have a loving family, and part of love in a family is sometimes there's pain. A child can get sick. A spouse can get sick. There's losses. We lose our parents. Hopefully that's the way it works in life, not the other way around. A loss. A parent gets old and dies. And why is it painful? Because you love that parent. It wouldn't be painful if there was no love. And if you think of it in that context, then it's not a matter of quantity of saying, it's not a grocery shopping list of saying, I have 300 bad things and 200 good ones. It becomes part of a bigger picture. The woman, after she heard these two sections read, this woman that the doctors had given up, got up in her bed. Her daughter told me the story. She lifted herself up, and she wasn't strong. She was weak and in pain. And she said, call the doctors in. I will not stop my life. I want to continue living. This gave her a reinfusion, reigniting. You talk about reigniting a fiery spirit, reigniting her soul. She said, if that was my life, that I've shaped lives as an educator. So yes, I'm in pain right now, but my life doesn't begin or end right now. It's all a piece of a bigger puzzle. And lo and behold, you know what happened? She, a few months later, went into remission. Now she has passed away since, but not for that illness. The years passed. She was an elderly woman. But she lived another 5 years after that, where doctors had given up hope. Now, I'm not suggesting toward a meaningful life saves lives like that. That would be a good marketing line. But I am suggesting that sometimes our attitudes and our perspectives can defeat us or they can help us. And what happened was this reawakened a certain spirit in her, a certain willpower, which definitely helped her and helped her fight and wanted to live, and she had not give up. So I agree we don't have an answer to the tragic events in our lives. And God should bless us all with mercy that we shouldn't have to go through pain. And the number, even quantitatively, our good things should more outnumber the negative. But you have to remember life is a mystery, and it's all intertwined. When there's no love, there's usually also no pain. And when there is love, there is going to be pain involved. It's a double-edged sword. Feelings are feelings. Feelings can be hurt, and feelings can be extremely nurturing. So you could say, yes, I'd rather live a life like I am a rock on an island, where you'll not feel any pain, but also you won't not feel any love. It doesn't work both ways. You cannot just lock yourself up emotionally that you won't only feel the negative and feel the positive. First of all, you don't know which one is coming. Your doors are locked. Secondly, part of emotions are open to all types of different experiences. So this is not really the topic of the lesson of this night's class, but I wanted to just address it because I absolutely agree. Some of the parts of the musical notes in the composition are tragic. But the interesting thing, when you're listening to music, you know that, and you know there's resolution to the tragedy in the musical composition. That's why it is a good analogy. Because it's true, if it was just an isolated tragic event in your life, then it's like that woman, it's just too much. But if you see it as part of a composition, and sometimes you hear music, that there's parts of it that really can make you cry in its sadness, but then it leads you to another place. It leads you to a place where you suddenly either resolution, and more importantly, it's like that which doesn't kill you makes you stronger, that you're able to cry. It also brings you to a place that when you come through it and grow through it, you become much stronger for it, because you looked at it, you looked at pain in its eyes, head on, and still survived, and learned that you can move on and you can grow. We all know, any one of us who's gone through anything like that knows that when you've experienced a loss, a disappointment, and even profound ones, and you've grown, and years have passed, and time has passed, and you've grown through it, you are a much stronger person, because you've seen it, and you know that you do not obliterate. Many people are too afraid, and they are afraid of it, and that alone annihilates them. I don't know if you ever saw the scene in the end of it was first a play. It was a book and a play, and then it became a film. Children of Lesser God. So there's the love affair between the relationship between the deaf woman and the teacher, who was obviously, and they lived in two different worlds. And of course, they go through the whole rocky relationship back and forth and so on. And the end of the story, at least in the film, is it's a memorable line. Because what happened was ultimately, as much as they loved each other, they lived in different worlds. She lived in the world of silence, he lived in the world of sound. And it seems like an inseparable rift. You can never really bridge the two. And that's really part of the theme of the movie, whether love can really transcend that. So there's a line there at the end when she tells him about how hurt she was and how tough she became as a result. She said, that she had to become tough because she lived a life that people always looked down, was condescending to her, and treated her like a handicapped girl and all of that. So she had to develop, and she had a healthy pride and dignity, but she built up walls. And she says to him that, I think, William Hurt is the actor? Yeah. That I learned from you through love that I can be hurt, and I don't shrivel up and disappear. Like the petals of a flower, that you can hurt and still survive. That's a big lesson that comes through emotions.
Isn't the title of the movie sacrilegious?
It's fine with me. It doesn't hurt me. Unless it's, I mean, the point of the title is, I guess, the idea that some people see those that are less, that are lacking something as being lesser, in that sense. And finally, they do reconnect, and I don't know if this is real in real life, but it's definitely, for movies, it's a good happy ending. We like happy endings. And where they determined to meet in a place that's beyond silence and beyond sound. How do you like that? That sounds so beautiful, right? We all wish we can do that. So the point is that it is a bigger picture, and we are those musical notes. So the question is, like in this case with this woman in Chicago, and hopefully your mother can build the strength to get through it and not have to deal with it. But it's part of reality. Life, as we age especially, has all kinds of unknowns, and unfortunately some people are struck with illnesses that are, we don't even want to speak their name. And there are challenges, and no one should know of it, but it's part of reality and part of life. So the question, back to the theme of this discussion here, go back on a more positive note, is, what was the title again? What happened to your fiery spirit? So this is something that comes, as I often share with you, that many of the themes, I would say all the themes that I discuss in these classes, are are not my own innovations. They're usually a result of discussions I have with people on the ground, real life, which is why I'm able to address things that are not just theoretical. It's, real life stories like our own, and try to make them relevant to all of us. So though some of what I'm going to say here fits some of us more than others, but I think everybody can learn from some of these ideas. So it's a big question that people ask. It always, breaks your heart when someone says, they look at a picture of themselves when they were younger and they say, what has happened to this person? Where have I gone? And thus, what has happened to my fiery spirit? What has happened to your fiery spirit? Some of us, when we were younger, adventurous, electrifying lives, everything was possible, nothing was impossible. And then life starts rolling. And at some point you look at yourself in the mirror, or you look at your activities. And many of us have somewhat seemed like we've lost some of our spunk, some of the sparkle. And that's what happens with life. That does this to people. Now some of us here, I'm sure, feel that we've lost nothing, that we're as feisty and as energetic as ever, and that's great. But it's rare, actually, because life and its years affect us all. And I just want to say, when I say years, I don't mean you have to be 80 years old, even if you're 30 years old. Some people live to 30 and they feel very old. So I don't mean this in years as an age, purely old age. I mean it in years as life. You start working day by day and experiencing some of the injustices, unfairness, even cruelty. See things that as you get older, you start seeing things that you didn't believe were possible, how people can hurt each other, how money affects people, how power, abuse. Each of us have our life story. And everyone has their nightmares and they have their horror stories. And that all these events accumulate and they ultimately harden us. They jade us. So I'm specifically speaking in broad terms because each of you has a different story, and I don't want to sound generic because I know life isn't generic. Everyone's another story. But I think everyone can agree here, if we went through the room, everybody can fill in the blanks. Somewhat what I'm capturing is somewhat your story, except everyone in a different way. Some of us went through terrible situations, seen the worst, seen major betrayal, hurt. Some of us grown up in homes where we lost our childhoods far too young. But even if you went through the best type of life, we're not immune to these challenges. So this idea, what has happened to my fiery spirit, is a question I think all of us can relate to. Now some will say, well, I never had a fiery spirit in the first place. It's another character. We have to take that into consideration. Is there anybody in this room that would classify themselves that way without exposing yourself? Yes? Okay. Well, you're young. You have a bright future ahead of you. Let's put it this way. If you've never had a fiery spirit, then maybe that's what not your opportunity is to become one now. Now, some may say, I don't even want to be a fiery spirit. It doesn't sound so appealing. Well, it's another story. But one thing is for sure, I don't think anybody would like to be called mediocre, right? Is that correct? Or is anybody here consider mediocre a compliment? That's maybe another topic for another week. Do you think mediocrity is a virtue? The virtue of being mediocre. Well, the virtue of being mediocre is usually one that you're not going to have a lot of pain, and you're not going to be very addicted to things, because you're pretty much you don't get obsessed with anything. That's maybe the virtue of mediocre. Like stones are mediocre, and so are many other things that don't feel anything. So they have the virtue of, like animal bliss, but as soon as you're feeling something, that means that you're usually, some type of fire is burning in there. So let me start with this. Number one is, this is not a matter of personality or different types. Every soul is on fire, period. A soul is not just on fire, a soul is fire. It's synonymous with the word fire. Ner Hashem nishmat Adam. The soul of the human being is the fire of God. Now what does it mean on fire? Why is it then when you see some people, you see them, have a hot-blooded, passionate, fiery, feisty and all that, and others are more cool and collected and reflective and so on? That's just the difference there is how they express their fire, but everyone has fire inside of them. Everyone has passion inside of them. The question is, what is it that's going to turn your passion on? What is it that's going to light your fire? I know that was a line used by a group of, that was at the time considered a little controversial, but I have no problem using it because I think they plagiarized us and not we them. Jim Morrison and the Doors, with all due respect, fire goes back. Ner Shem Nishmat Adam is a verse in the book of Proverbs. The fire of your soul. So light my fire means lighting the fire of the soul. And the Torah is full of lighting fires. Light the fire of the menorah. We light fires every Shabbos before Friday afternoon, before Shabbat, before the holidays. On the other extreme, we light the fire, neshama light for people's souls that move on. Hanukkah lights. We have plenty of lighting fires. So I don't find that controversial, even though what he meant may have been something else. But yes, actually sexuality definitely identifies with fire. But the root is not purely sexuality. The root is the soul. The soul and its fire. That's really what it comes down to. So it's really a pure and holy passion. That's where it's rooted. That doesn't mean it cannot manifest in unholy fire. But the concept of fire is part of the soul. Now, as you know, the recurrent theme as well in these discussions here is that in some ways, some of these ideas have been hijacked by different religions like Christianity and others who have turned these ideas into being sins. Fiery passion, most people will identify with something that's sinful. And if you're really a divine religious person, you shouldn't be that passionate. You shouldn't be that fiery. You should be, much more cerebral or whatever it may be. That's an absolute myth. That's based on a distortion of the concept of sexuality and distortion of the concept of original sin and the distortion about what a soul is all about. I discussed it last week, discussing the power of passion and desire and lust even. The idea of desiring something is a holy thing that we desire. Our soul desires something. The question is whether the object of the desire is holy. That's another story. But just because some people use their passion for unholy things doesn't mean the passion is unholy. It just means that they are directing it to an object that is not healthy. Like in any situation, a person is very hungry. So if you can eat something healthy, you can eat something unhealthy. Or a person has a need that's very desperate, their need. They fill that need either through something healthy or something unhealthy, holy or unholy. But the passion itself is a very powerful and healthy thing. So in that sense, fire is a very powerful force in our lives and what really does keep us going. And the fact is, the younger we are, the more the fire is alive. Why is that? Very simple. Because the less materialism that you have experienced, the more spirituality you have. There's an expression in the Zohar that says, Tukva the nishmasa, when your soul is strong, chulsha de gufa, your body is weaker. I don't mean weaker in a healthy way. I mean weaker simply the material force of your body's needs. And then the other extreme, tukva de gufa, when your body is strong and your physical and material needs demand a lot of you, then your spiritual, your nishmasa is chulsha de nishmasa. It makes your spirituality weaker because you can't have it both ways. I just qualify that, let me explain. That doesn't mean that Judaism preaches asceticism. We have to have a healthy soul and a healthy body. Well, the question is who's dominating? If you are seduced and obsessed with some type of material need, whatever that need may be, there's really less room for your soul to express itself. So in this context, there is the idea of the younger you are, you can say, the more the fire is alive. That's why children, as I always mention, run around without any limits, exploring the world. They're excitable, they're adventurous, they have their free abandon. As we grow older, yes, on one hand you could say you mature, so you don't have that type of carefree attitude, but there's also another part that happens. You close down your soul, and your creativity and your energy becomes much more limited and disciplined. One of those talks in the TED conference, I forgot who it was, this British educator, where he talks about a major distortion he feels in Western education system, which was basically modern Western education is built on Napoleon and one of the kings in England, developed it really above all to develop new soldiers and people who would feed the economic workforce. So the curriculum of Western education became shaped around mathematics, business education, things that are necessary to build a material world. Where, for example, focus on the arts and music and creativity, that was considered to be like special education, like an extracurricular activity. And his argument is, and you can see it online, this is a short talk about it, his argument is that human beings are naturally more creative, and it'd be music and the arts that should really be the dominant curriculum, with mathematics and physics and the sciences to be something to be secondary, and that would be much more conducive to what the spirit is like. And there's no question in my mind that is absolutely true. I don't know how the education system can be changed, but the basic idea is that human beings are natural. The soul is a naturally creative force. Music is more natural to us than words, for example, but we are trained to think otherwise. So a younger child will love music all the time until say, now enough music. Now let's get to real life. Real life takes over, and music becomes a hobby. It becomes this thing we escape to. But in truth, the natural environment of a soul is in music. The natural environment of the soul is in creativity. It's in fiery things, not in the wick, but in the flame, basically. So that's a critical thing to establish, that the soul of every human being is a piece of fire. It's a flickering flame, yearning, searching, seeking something greater. I've often pointed out that a flame defies gravity. The soul wants transcendence. It's the body and all that it represents, the gravitational pull of the material world that pulls us down. It says, no, you're hungry, you're thirsty, you need this, you need that. The flame of the soul wants to, in a sense, break away from the gravitational hold of this material world. And they battle each other. As we get older, usually the body wins and the soul is less dominant. When we're younger, it's the other way around. Obviously, the objective is to balance the two, that they both feed each other. So the fiery spirit is the natural part of us. But then comes the sad loss of innocence, or the sad loss. When you hear people who once had that type of energy, and they say, what has happened to it all? I'm not the same person. I heard recently a woman came speak to me about, she now has older children that are getting married, and her children see her as a basically square, boring parent, And she tells me about her life when she was a teenager. She says, I never shared with them that I was a lot wilder than all of them put together, and she was a real free spirit. And I said to her, so why don't you share it? What happened to it? And she said, I literally started crying. She says, I just locked it up. I thought it was not healthy. I thought it was not conducive to building a family. I thought it was not conducive to being disciplined. I mean, today she's a Jewish observant woman, to building a Jewish life. So she thought it was all about shutting down that part of herself. And she thought that was a virtue. And she was taught by her teachers that you have to keep that at bay. It'll get you into trouble, all that spirit and all that. So she shut it down. She said, I became a dutiful wife, and that part of me just remained locked away. Once in a while, I would have a fantasy, but it really, I didn't live up. And now her children are rebelling, And interestingly, it's like they don't even know their own mother. So, which of course creates its own set of problems. Like, what did she have to do? How unnatural did she have to become to educate her children? And what impact will it have on them? And she's concerned about that. So obviously it's not something you can undo 20, 30 years later. But slowly, what I'm suggesting to her is that you have to reintroduce yourself to your children. You have to teach them a little about who you are. And more importantly, you have to start living up to it. So the first step, of course, is to show her, it's a big mistake. It's not true. Judaism never asks anyone to close their fire of their soul. That's ridiculous. Why would God give us a soul that's on fire and tell you to shut it down? It's like, it would be like God creating a sun and telling the sun not to shine. Yes, there's a time where the sun has to set, and then the night takes over. But then the sun rises again. So it has to be channeled, harnessed. But to say that a person's passion, a person's fire, a person's soul should remain, should be cut down, is almost like destroying God's plan in God's world, which of course is not a healthy thing to do. So I'm giving her the permission, the license, that she can allow her fire to, and she's a very talented person, has never really used her talent. Thank God she's found a job recently that is starting to express that talent. I'm just using it as a case study, an example. In her case it may be more extreme, but every one of us has elements of this. So the first thing I need to establish is that we have to get rid of this guilt thing. I don't know where the concept of Jewish guilt came from in the first place, because actually in Hebrew there's no real word for guilt. There's a word for regret, there's a word for tshuva, return, repent. But the stereotype of Jewish guilt, whether it originates from Freud or from Woody Allen, I'm not sure, or some other Jewish luminaries is not a Jewish concept. Guilt. So let's translate what the word means. We have, for example, in the words like the Hebrew, there's a word called Ashem. Ashem, actually, there's even an offering in the Torah, Korban Ashem. So yes, technically you can translate Ashem as guilt, but let me define what the word really means. What is guilt really all about? The person feels guilty. So the stereotype is obvious. The stereotype is that your mother makes you feel guilty, and she feels guilty, like, why don't you go to synagogue? Why don't we do a Passover Seder? Grandma is going to be disappointed, that type of thing. Basically, it's a guilt trip to make us feel, motivate us, so to speak, to want to do something. But the truth is, if you think about it, what is guilt's real effect? It's basically demoralizing. It's a demoralizing thing that when you live with, some people just live with guilt all their lives. So when you say the word Ashem in the Torah, that's not what it means. Because here's the rule. Any feeling, any emotion that demoralizes you comes from the Yetzer Hara. This is a rule stated in Tanya. If it's emotion that makes you feel motivated to grow, then it comes from a holy place. And he explains the difference between depression, atzvus in Hebrew, and merirus. In Hebrew, atzvus is depression. Merirus is literally bitterness, but it really means sadness. Sadness is not a bad thing. Sadness can be extremely healthy emotion. Because when you feel sad about your situation, or remorse, it motivates you to want to grow and get out of the situation, correct a mistake you may have made. Depression, on the other hand, demoralizes you. It makes you feel you're worthless. It makes you feel you don't have strength, and it does not motivate you to grow. It keeps you trapped. So you can always see the proof is in the pudding. So let me break it down a little more. A guilt that motivates you, and not you become obsessed with guilt, and that's the dominating feeling. It motivates you because you feel you did something wrong, and you should correct it. Yeah, that type of guilt is a healthy thing. But the guilt that we usually associate with Jewish guilt is the other type, the one that you just to feel guilty, as an end in itself, and usually does not necessarily motivate. It makes you feel bad about yourself. It makes you think how terrible you are. So to be correct, yes, there is a word Ashem, but it's not the usual definition of guilt. I would say it's more where a person feels remorse and feels a pang of shame. In the healing, there's healthy shame and unhealthy shame. Unhealthy shame is the example used, for example, hiding the fact from all your friends that, God forbid, your father is an alcoholic. You don't want any friends coming home because you don't want to be embarrassed. That's unhealthy shame. That type of shame is one of the most destructive forces in life. People driven by such shame will haunt them and affect everything in their lives. That type of dirty secret. And as adults, it's hard to imagine how profound of effect it has on children. When children have a dirty secret, it is like toxic. Adults have learned to be, secrets. We have our little secrets and we hide things and so on. We don't think it's so dangerous. It's also destructive for an adult. But for a child to grow up with such shame is absolute demoralization, because it means that you say a child who is embarrassed of his father or mother who are alcoholic or abusive and have to constantly hide it. That means that you're less. You feel worthless, you're self-loathing and all of that. On the other hand, healthy shame would be an example. You meet a friend you haven't seen in 30 years, and that friend has reached great heights of scholarship and piety. And look where you are, and you feel ashamed. You feel ashamed even to talk to them. Look what you've done, look what he's done. That's healthy shame. Why is that? Because it's not some dirty secret. It's shame, showing that you could have done so much more. And it's motivating in most cases. So I didn't want to go into this detail, but since you asked about Hashem, I wanted to emphasize this point. So the idea to go back to what we're discussing, the first thing we have to knock out of our systems and our programming is that fire and passion is an unholy or unhealthy thing. It's not. It's what makes a human being alive. That's the difference between a corpse and a live human being. That there's fire, there's energy, there's electricity, there's more motivation. And the more fire, the more your soul is alive. But everything has a double-edged sword, which means it needs to be channeled. Young people especially, with a lot of fire, you don't channel it, it can be very destructive. Because if they're frustrated or someone is very driven and there's no outlet, what happens? Like any fire, fire can consume, fire can destroy. But without fire in this world, where would we be? So the sun has to be exactly a certain distance from this earth to achieve what it achieves. The sun was a little too close, it would burn this earth up. A little too far, the earth, it would freeze the earth. So warmth, heat, fire is a necessity in life. But with measure, discipline, harnessed. That's the key. Unfortunately, we usually go to extremes. So we all have a fiery spirit. And we all have that passion. It's hard to identify here in a group what your passion is, but everyone has a passion. And with a little effort, it's not hard to discover. And interestingly, sometimes you discover your passion in some of the unhealthy things you've done. Because it comes from you. Why are you driven to those things? And a good analysis, you can discover from that, and then figure out how to still release the passion and still channel it to something healthier, something holier. But the idea that a spirit is on fire is absolutely divine, as I shared with that woman that I mentioned earlier. So that's what it is. Now, what happens to it? What happens, as I said, as material life begins to take over, so then the monotony of life, the pressures, the challenges, you have to make ends meet, you have to satisfy this one and satisfy that one. You have employers and employees and clients and family. I mean, the list goes on. Everybody's got their list of people you have to please, and especially if you're a pleaser for whatever reason. So all this begins to wear you down. And where does the fire of your soul go? It goes undercover. It goes into hiding. But it's still there. And that's why you'll see a person like that will usually act out, because at times when that fire suddenly demands attention, and you've lived for months and months without satisfying it, it's going to usually act out because it's not disciplined. So you may keep it repressed for a while, but then when it comes out with a vengeance. And then usually you get yourself into deep trouble. It all shows you how the imbalance takes place. But think of it this way: if someone had shown you that you have powerful fire, don't let it go undercover, because once it does, number one, you're undermining yourself. Number two, when it finally wants its attention, it's going to usually completely take over, and sometimes not the way you like it, and it'll take control of your life. So the idea of having a fire in your life is critical to keep it constantly satisfied. I'll use myself as a kosher guinea pig for experimentation purposes. So I was a teenager, yes, believe it or not. Once, I still feel I am, but my passport says a little differently. So I was a teenager, still teenager at spirit now, and I grew up in a very traditional Hasidic home, you can say, and early years of your life, formative years, as a kid, before your early teens and even earlier than that, you're not really conscious of all your decisions. Life just you're on a what do they call it? That's one expression. I wanted to use a different one. On some type of assembly line, or like a belt. What do they call it? A conveyor belt. That was the word I was going to say. But it's the same idea. And life carries you. Where your parents take you, where school takes you, trips. I mean, you don't really control your destiny much. And then you suddenly become conscious of yourself, whatever age that is. 16, 15. You become conscious that you're an entity. You're an independent entity of others. And of course, that itself is somewhat of a epiphany. You start having to deal with that. And then suddenly the people you've gone to school with all your life, you look at some of them like they're imbeciles. You don't even realize how could you be best friends with some of them. And they may look at you the same way, so it's fine, so be it. And the only common denominator is that you happen to live near each other. You happen to go to the same class. It doesn't mean like you chose these people to be your friend. And everyone goes through their stuff. And I went through mine, and I had a lot of skepticism inside of me, wondering about this whole program that I grew up in called Judaism, and traditions and rituals, which runs and governs your life from beginning to the end, from Shabbos to holidays, and Pesach, forget about. It's a constant demands upon you. The good news is that I grew up in a home that was open-minded. There was no dogma. My father was a journalist, my mother is an educated woman, so we had ideas were on the table. We were never silenced. Conversation. So that was a very big thing. I have no idea what I would be like if it was a different type of home. So that's a gift. So I could breathe. It wasn't like your questions are silenced, or your personality is constantly being judged. No judgment in my house. But I saw the communities and I saw the environments, the religious environments. They're full of judgment and full of condescension and full of guilt and the rest of it. And as I said, since it didn't affect me personally, thank God it didn't leave any scars. But I'm absolutely cognizant of it, and shaped a lot of how I saw things. But I had also a lot of passion in me, which I didn't even realize at the time. I had energy. And I didn't, at that age, we live in a segregated world, in a religious world, so you don't have girlfriends. So you don't have, it's not expressed in that fashion. And so expressed, it could be through sports, through cutting school, through making trouble, Thank God I was also not involved in any drugs, so it wasn't channeled in that direction. So for me, it became intellectual passion. It became like, thinking a lot. What am I supposed to do with my life? And what am I going to do with my life? And it was pretty much, I could say it was a pretty sheltered life. So I didn't I know that I had gotten a little older, and I had gotten a little more bolder, and I had not found a channel, I probably would have gotten myself into deep trouble. Because I was definitely at the borderline troublemaker. But at that point, I still knew where the line was, make sure I didn't get expelled from school too much and stuff like that, as some of my friends did. But so it was all kinds of ridiculous type of outlets, nothing to write home about. And I wasn't even able to, at that age, you don't self-analyze yourself. You don't really have it worked out. And I didn't have anyone to talk to about it. So it was just, I speak about it now with a certain detachment and ability to analyze it in retrospect. But at the time, of course, I wasn't aware of all this that I'm describing. It just was happening as I speak about it now. But as I look back, what happened was I had this energy and this passion, a lot of it. And I had no idea that it would be, it would be channeled. I love music. I loved art. I loved the so-called avant-garde, cutting-edge stuff. And it was all there. And I accessed it as much as I was able. Remember, there was no internet. I was a voracious reader. I read a lot. And I was gathering a lot of information. But I didn't know. It wasn't like I had this mentor that told me, you may be able to be a good writer. Try to write, try to communicate. All this was trial and error. I had no idea. But I knew I had a lot of energy. And as I said, if it gone a little longer, and if I was locked up or felt repressed, I probably would have acted out in very destructive ways. So now I said I can analyze it. And I identify immediately when I speak to teenagers, 16-year-olds, 17-year-olds. I could see immediately because I see myself. Now all of us may be a little different, and the shape of our passions take on different shapes. So what happened with me? You may wonder. Well, here I am. So I guess I didn't get into total trouble, even though some people say I'm making trouble. But relatively this is good trouble. So what happened with me was, I'm not going to do a total confession here, because confession is also not the Jewish thing like guilt, but I'll do a partial confession, okay, to be Yates. So for me, it really came down to was, I had an intellectual problem. I was wondering whether the whole Judaism was some type of mind control thing, like a cult that controls people. Maybe for good benefit, because it gives them a discipline, and the masses need some type of regulation, not to get themselves in too much trouble. Or was there real truth to this? Was there true divine truth? So it was real for me theological quandaries I had, which in a way was a good thing, because that's really where I was most troubled. So it wasn't about really mundane things. It was more of an ideological question. So at some point, I loved physics and mathematics. I remember in high school and stuff. But it was not like, I can't say it was a passion, but it was not a passion. I wasn't going to become a physicist. I knew that. That was not what I wanted to be. Not that I knew what I wanted to be, but that was not going to be it. Even though, as I said, I loved ideas and so on, I didn't see like I'm going to change the world with physics or something. But what happened was, I was listening to a talk that the Lubavitcher Rebbe was giving. He was talking exactly about what I was struggling with, which was the fire in the soul. And he was saying that young people have a fire in their souls. He's talking about actually the rebellions and the revolutions of the 60s. And he said that many people think that when you see young people rebelling against the norm, against the establishment, against the rules, Many people see it as a negative thing. You know, young people, breaking the rules, making trouble. And at best, you have to tolerate them until they grow out of it. And then they become like the rest of us, you know. So just let them get them through the minefield and manipulate or maneuver. And there'll be some collateral damage. But like the hippies of the 60s became the establishment and the abusers of the 70s. And the cycle continues, you know. I remember when that article about Bob Dylan, who was considered to be one of these guys speaking about the social injustices and ills, and when they had his whole expose about how he abuses his women, you know, suddenly became, okay, there you go. It's the same old story. All these guys talking about revolution, give them a little power and money, and they become the same thing. That same old cynicism. So what he was saying was that many people think this fire, this rebellion in young people is something that best you have to tolerate. And his response was, no, absolutely not. The rebellion in young people comes from the fire of the soul that refuses to accept the status quo and wants to change the world and is frustrated and doesn't know how. So adults would do well, is what he said. What adults would do well if they don't want to help get out of the way, and if they do, to help appreciate and channel this fire, this energy, into a spiritual revolution. That's what I heard. And it pretty much blew me away, I must say. Why? Because this was coming from a 75-year-old Rebbe, who, actually there's a picture of him right there on the wall. And, you know, speaking from let's call it from a New York Times anti-religious bias, where they don't call it a cult, they'll call it a sect. You know, it was like coming from an ultra-Orthodox 75, you don't really hear things that are like hip like that. I didn't hear that from people my own age, or so on. So it was very intriguing to me. Where did he get these ideas from? Because it doesn't sound like the traditional ideas of what you hear in a regular Jewish environment. So I began to look into it, and I was amazed to find that when you really dig, that there is a fire going on behind, behind the traditional garb of some. But then I realized that most of the Jewish world has no clue. They're clueless. And the more religious they are, the more clueless they are. Because their rituals and the mind control is what controls their lives. And the fire is almost extinguished. And it's almost seen as a crime to have fire and passion in your life. So therefore, what do they do with their passion? It becomes illicit passion, because that's the only place where they can release it, because it can't be holy. Holiness and passion are incompatible. You know, and all this, as I said, I didn't have words for it when I was 17, but I had instincts that today I have words for. And that began my journey. So I threw myself into the books. I realized knowledge is power. I need to know what it says in the original books, not how it's passed on to me by teachers and rabbis and charlatans. I don't mean that they're all necessarily the same, and others who are trying to sell you something. Really, what does it say in the books that are written? Some of these books are passed on thousands of years. What does it say about these ideas? And that was what became my passion, was to figure it out. That was my passion for the next 2 years, my 19, 20, and stuff like that. And then, as I matured, I discovered through myself, and I had to do it really almost self-made. I didn't have where to. There was no some kind of what we call a Jewish incubator think tank for creative souls to express themselves. There still isn't. And I did whatever I did. I got involved in writing and stuff like that. The rest is history. Here I am. But right. And let me tell you this. I wrote a chapter in Torah Meaning for Life dedicated to this story that I just shared with you, except my name is not in it. It's called Youth, which became an inspiration for Matisyahu when he wrote his song, an album called Youth, just for the record. So I wrote the story down. That's another way of redeeming your life. You write everything down. As a writer, you know, they say, the cynics say that there are two people that never will be redeemed, will never do tshuva. That's writers and speakers, of which I'm both. So I have a double no redemption. Why? Because when a writer hears something inspiring, instead of taking it to heart, he says, great material for my next article. So, so you never really take it personally. So that's one of the downsides of being a writer. You make everyone else feel they have to do tshuva. I mean, while you're just the channel. So there are benefits. Membership has its benefits. Let's put it this way. Okay. So with that being said, I want to say to all of you, I don't know what happened to your fiery spirits and where you stand today. But the first thing I must say, as a major disclaimer or a major introduction to the whole thing, is Judaism is all about fire. You know, there's the expression, Eish Eichlahi, that God is called a fiery spirit, a fire that consumes in a positive way. The soul is Ner Hashem Nishmas Adam. Everything about Judaism is about passion. And where the passion has gone, well, over 2,000 years of suffering and defensiveness and running from enemies, you can imagine a lot of the passion is dissipated, or a lot of it has been channeled to be what we call anti-Semitism. A lot of organizations, their biggest fundraising pitch is we're anti-Semites, you know. So then you ask someone the question, so what do you stand for? What are you passionate for? Not what are you passionate against? And they don't have a lot to say. You know, much easier to define passion through an enemy and say, I'm against the enemy. I don't want that. I want to protect myself. But when you suddenly are free, like we are today as the Jewish people are free, it becomes much more difficult. Or they tell that story about Israel, a Jew gets up in the Knesset and says, I have a solution to all our problems. Instead of what we're doing, why don't we just attack America? And of course America will beat us, and then we'll be like Japan and Germany after World War II, and they'll rebuild us and we'll become a superpower. This was in the early days of after 1948. And another Jew gets up, an old Jew, and says, yeah, but what happens if we win? You know? We are good at being underdogs and survivors. The question is... Yeah, that's what he says?
No, it's about this little country that decided to fight the United States. It's like, you know, they get all the benefits, and then they beat the United States.
And then what do they do now? Right, okay, exactly. So sometimes when you have an enemy for many, many years and you've developed that defensive mechanism, you know, you just defense. Once you have what you fought for, it becomes very difficult. What do you do with it? Not that simple. What do you stand for? Not what you stand against. And it's a big dilemma. There's a big identity crisis in that way. And so you'll find Jewish communities that some of them still create the enemy, even if it isn't there. And they continue to create passion. We're still anti-this, we're anti-secularism, we're anti-Zionism, we're anti-whatever it is. Everybody's got it. So it's a way of keeping the passions alive. But can you really keep a passion alive when the enemy is dead? You know, they say in Pacific Islands, there's still soldiers, Japanese soldiers, that are still fighting World War II. You know how many islands there are in the Pacific? There are millions of islands. I mean, I don't know if recently, but I think in the 60s, they came to an island, and there was a Japanese guy, and he had a rusty machine gun, and he saw an American. He wanted to shoot him. So they told him, the emperor is dead, World War II ended 25 years ago. He didn't believe it. You know, some people are still fighting a war that long ago ended. Now, for some people, that satisfies the need to channel your passion. But you see, Abraham, his passion was, if you look at his life, even though he began a life having to protect himself from enemies, but his whole life was driven by one thing, passionate love. He wanted to spread love. He had an open home, chesed, guests, and that was his passion, to spread love in the world, to spread monotheism, to spread unity, God's unity. And the same thing was with Moses. So it's true in the Torah there are 365 don'ts, but there are 245 yeses. You know? And there's interesting disagreement when it says in the Mechilt, in the Medrash, it says that when the Jews are at Sinai, so there's an argument between Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Yishmael about what they heard, the 10 Commandments, what did they answer? So you have it's a strange argument if you think about it. What's the argument? So Rabbi Yishmael says that when they heard the positive mitzvahs, they said, Hain, yes, we'll do. And when they heard the negative mitzvahs, they said, love, we won't do it. So when they heard Anoich Hashem Elokecha, they said yes. When they heard Lo Signev, don't steal, they said no, meaning they acknowledged not to do it. Rabbi Akiva comes and says no. Whatever they heard, they said yes. God said a positive mitzvah, they said yes. God said a negative mitzvah, they also said yes. Yes, we'll keep it. Not yes, we'll obviously transgress. They meant yes. Now the question is, what's the argument exactly? Is it semantics? They both have the same meaning. They both agree that the Jews accepted what God told them, both the negatives and the positives. Why? What's significant about saying yes to the no's or saying no to the no's? Yes means yes, I will not do it. No means no, I won't do it. So what is it semantics? And it's a famous disagreement, Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi Yishmael. And for many who don't understand really what it means, it sounds like yet another ridiculous argument about a nuance that makes no difference. Who really cares? And this is what Jews gave their lives for thousands of years, whether to say yes or no, when the conclusion is the same. My benaya, what difference does it make? But if you go into a deeper analysis, it has a profound difference. You see, Rabbi Shmuel was a kohen. He was a priest, some say a high priest. Rabbi Akiva was a convert or a child of converts. They come from completely different backgrounds. So they have different perspectives on life. Rabbi Shmuel saw life in a sense, very black and white. He was a tzaddik. He saw there's the yeses and there's the no's. So yes is a yes and no is no. For a person who comes from darkness, like Rabbi Akiva, remember for 40 years he did not know any Torah. At 40 years old he began to study and then become the greatest giant scholar he was, greater than Rabbi Shmuel. For him, he saw yes everywhere. Even in the negatives he saw yes. There was no such thing as just a no. Because he had gone through it. It's like someone who goes through darkness sees the redemption of darkness. And this is consistent. Throughout the Talmud, you'll find Rabbi Akiva has that message. For example, Rabbi Akiva and his colleagues were standing and watching the Temple Mount after the destruction of the temple. And his colleagues were crying because they saw the fox running in a place where once there was the Holy of Holies. Sha'olim Hilchim, they saw a fox, which was like an unbelievable desecration. Imagine seeing a place that was once the high point of all of existence, and now it's barren ruins, and animals are running around. And it's a very sad thing to see. So they began to cry. And Rabbi Akiva, they saw, began to laugh. So the Talmud they asked Rabbi Akiva, why are you laughing? Why are you crying? They say, well, because it's the fulfillment of this tragic, as you said, the fulfillment of the tragic prophecies that the temple will be destroyed due to our sins. Why are you laughing? He says, because when you read the continuation of the prophecy, it says after the destruction there will be being rebuilt. So when the other sages heard that, they said, Akiva nechamtani. You, Akiva, Rabbi Akiva, you have consoled us, twice. Now why didn't they see? They also knew the verse. Because they didn't experience light that comes out of darkness. Rabbi Akiva did in his life. So wherever he looked at, he saw the positive. That means that even the negative mitzvahs, even when you say negative, is not about running away from enemies. It means that you can even enter there and you can come out of it stronger. That doesn't mean we have a right to go there, but it's a different perspective of life. That we don't have to live a life of fear that the secular world is going to vanquish us. A person who lives like that is basically a person who cannot really deal with a world like that. We live a life where we can transform the world. Avram Avinu, Abraham, Moses, the great, they all knew that. They had a vision that what they stood for. It wasn't just what they were against. And that vision, what they stood for, of course, included also philosophies and peoples and races and cultures that they opposed. But it was driven by a positive vision, not by a negative one. So I share with you this because as I began to grow and mature, I realized this. And I realized, so good, I understand Jews have suffered for so many years, and I'm not blaming anyone, but they've developed a Golos mentality, like an inferiority complex, and everybody wants to kill us. And it was true, and maybe even true today in some ways. But you can't live your life. Is that the philosophy of Judaism? Is this what we teach our children? Would I want to embrace that as a philosophy? If that's what I was taught, I would run the other direction. People who are young and passionate don't want to hear that my passion is about fighting another enemy. You want to hear my passion is I stand for something. I have something to be proud of. That the Sinai brought civilization to the world. That we have a vision that can change the universe. With what's going on now in the Middle East, for example. So I wrote an article a few weeks ago. It had a very strong reaction from many people. A positive one, I should add. Not that I hadn't had negative reactions too, which is also good. At least there's a reaction. Better than being ignored. So, my main point was that, here the Middle East is going through, 1 billion people are going through, it is 1 billion people ultimately. All these 10, 15 countries are going through a type of a revolution which is probably be even more bigger than the French and American revolutions in the 18th century, because many more countries, and it's going to have radical changes will happen. There's no question about it. Just a matter of time, It's an inevitability if you really think about it, because it's the story of history. This has been the history. History was always led from autocrats from monarchs, totalitarian regimes, to regimes where the people want to have more power, more freedom, more say. That doesn't mean it doesn't have its pains and everything has its blessings and its curses. But the point is that we Jews know more about this than anybody. We've been there. We've seen it all. We say it every time in the Haggadah, the Passover night. We say we began, I was saying, our parents were first, Evdei Avodah Zarah, they were once worshipping idols, and now then they embraced God. We began in a pagan life, secular life, and we learned what means spiritual vision. We began a life of fragmentation, and we discovered unity. But how many Jews speak this way? Do you know any? Do you know many that get up and speak this way? Because we've lost our direction. And you don't have to look more further than the Bible itself. You just have to open up a Torah, read what Abraham says, what Moshe Rabbeinu says, what the great leaders have always said. And you suddenly see it's not a parochial, narrow-minded picture. It's a big picture of life. Jews have what to say about life, period. About everything in life. About education, about charity, about pain, about joy. But it's become very localized and very parochial. That's a sad thing. And I'm not suggesting that it doesn't have its virtues, building strong families and so on. But we have a lot more. So there's much to be passionate about. So I developed my passion around this because I saw it lacking so much. And here's what I want to say to all of you. I think that every one of you has passion in your soul, no question about it. And age makes no difference. You know where age makes a difference? If you're allowed to make a difference. When you live a materialistic life, materialism ages. Spirituality does not. Period. So if you think your soul is older today than it was when you were 17, it's not. Because the soul is not affected by age. Age affects material things. Material universe that is erodes and ages. A soul does not age. As a matter of fact, you can argue that a soul becomes more vibrant with time because it has more experience. Since a soul is born, it doesn't die. Since it's not born, it doesn't age. Simple as that. So who ages? It's your body, and your perception ages. That's why you find people who can be 90 years old and their soul is as alive as it gets. That doesn't mean their body is always cooperating and the vehicle is sometimes worn down, but the spirit, the passion, the revolution inside of them does not age. So the first thing you have to know, you have a license and freedom to know that your soul is alive as it gets. Question is, how trapped is inside of you? How trapped is it inside of you and your perceptions and your resignation and giving up on yourself? What happens is the material world takes control. Money takes control, power takes control. You start seeing what people worship. People don't worship powerful souls. People worship powerful business people. People with power and money. That's what people worship. And we gravitate to what people worship. Why not go where that's where the strength is? Souls are not appreciated. On a personal level, they perhaps are. But that's really up to that because the masses are the masses, The question is that whether you have to buy into that or not. So it comes down to what is it that you're really worshiping? What is it that you value? Do not expect to allow that your soul, your fiery soul, is going to come out if you worship the material world. It doesn't work that way. You can't have it both ways. That doesn't mean that you shouldn't be successful in this material world and you can be prosperous. But if that's what you worship, that's your destiny. Then you will be affected by age, and time will pass, and you will definitely, your dreams and aspirations and anything that's transcendental has to weaken. There's no way around it. However, if you see the material world as a stepping stone, as a necessity, but not the thing an end in itself, and it's your soul's passions that matter more than anything else, then you have hope. And that is up to us. That is not something that anyone can choose for you. You have to choose that. So the question is really, yes, we are brainwashed by this world. There's no question about it. All of us are. We go, what is it that we're involved in tonight and tomorrow and the next day? It's usually our obligations, our daily obligations. It's making ends meet. It's where we're invested in making our monies or the different pressures and expectations that people have of us. We don't have a lot of time for the soul. So if you're not going to give it time, obviously its fire is going to remain where it is. And then there'll be the moments when it's going to be repressed enough, as I said, and it's going to come out with a vengeance, looking for relief. And then it does things that are usually destructive. That's how it works. You keep a fire locked up for too long, without release, when it comes crashing out, it consumes. The first thing you see firefighters do, God forbid, when there's a fire, they break the windows, because the fire has to release itself. Fire that's not released is very destructive, because then it explodes. And when it explodes, no one can say where it's going to affect. And I'm sure you have examples. Think of yourself times, the years that have passed that you have not allowed certain passions inside of you, and when it explodes, it's uncontrollable. Even you can't control it. Nobody can control it. So I'm not saying that in a threatening way. I'm just saying it as a matter of observation, a reality. So the question is, can you discover this fire in your soul? And where can it be directed? The question is where your passion is and where should it be channeled. And that's something that every one of us can definitely discover if you set your mind to it. I'm here to help if you like. Since a person, I've been through this and I deal with it all the time. So that you don't have that excuse either. I'm more than happy to speak to anybody about this. I don't know if it's for group therapy and for a group discussion, because everybody's got their own, it's a personal, sometimes private issue. But there's a lot of passion in every soul. I find that sometimes part of my mission is to help people to awaken it, and sometimes I regret it. But that's another story. I have to qualify. I don't really mean I regret it, but sometimes you awaken it, and then there's no telling what's going to happen. So fine, but maybe it's better to be awakened and then tamed than the other way around. I work with writers quite often, and I always tell writers, especially new writers, I said, have the courage, write as crazy as you want. Do not hold back anything. Write wild, because you could always tame a wild writing, but you can't. The other way around doesn't work. If you write in a very safe way, it's very hard to spice it up and make it exciting. But if you write very, very crazy, you could always tame it down and so on. And it's always good to see a person, complete release. But this has to be done, obviously, in controlled setting, and so don't see this as, not that you asked me permission, but I don't give anyone say that the Rabbi Jacobson told me I should just let it all hang out, and we hear tomorrow that you're in the news running down in Broadway and just, letting it all free. But there are times that you need that. I read about an advertising agency in California where they take their, when they get a project, and a client, they take their entire creative group to some playland. They have they have literally an amusement park for children that they rent out, and they have everyone playing in an amusement park with balls and with sand lots. I mean, like turning back to when they're 5 years old, and they have these adults playing games all day, and then late afternoon they have their first session because they want to release them and say, you got to think out of the box. They turn them back into children. It's a pretty interesting idea. Maybe it would be good for everybody to try that. But there, of course, the objective is making money at the end of the day, which is getting these people to be very creative. And then they break down into small breakout groups where everyone comes up with ideas of how we're going to sell this item or product. And so it's just interesting. So maybe Meaningful Life Center should sponsor some event like that, where we have a full day and just reconnect to your fiery spirit. Where has it gone? What I will say is, on a concluding note, that the fire in the soul has infinite possibilities. And often, many other problems that we have in our lives are symptoms of undernourished, or unexpressed passion. And it takes all kinds. It has all kinds of sad and side effects on the spirit. So often things that people complain about, or when you look at your life and you say certain things aren't working, you can define the symptom, but the root of it can often be traced to repressed passion, to repressed dreams even, things that you have inside of you that have never found real expression. So what's happening is it affects other areas of your life. This definitely has an impact when it comes to relationships, because in relationships, relationship is by definition one that requires love, emotions, passions, feelings, and stuff like that. So the question is, how do you release it in a healthy way? Some of us, as I said earlier, have the Jewish guilt and conscience that passion is not a healthy or holy thing. So it becomes almost like two different lives. There's the Jew in me, and there's the passion in me, when in truth they should be one. So that's one example that creates a lot of neurosis, where therapists and psychoanalysts today, starting with Freud, have demonstrated that religious neurosis is one of the worst of all, and it has creates unbelievable sexual perversions and sexual distortions and aberrations. But in truth, it's all based on a fundamental flaw which is that sexuality or passion has to be divorced from God. But this is very much Christian, very Christian, and has infiltrated society. So the backlash to that is, let's just cut out the whole religious part, get rid of the guilt, get rid of the neurosis, and just have unbridled passion, and just without any discipline at all, which of course is the other extreme. When in truth, if you really go back to the root of it, if God is fire and sexuality is God's instrument and creation, then the question is really how do you integrate the two, not how do you separate the two. I mean, I'm just using that as one example. So in that context, as I said at the beginning of the class, when Moses asked God, how can you l'chapra al nafshei sechem, we'll read this week in the Shabbos on Parsha Shkolim, where he says, Zeh yitnu, this is what you should give, the coin, the shekel, half a shekel. And with this you will l'chapra, you'll atone for nafshei sechem. So that's a very unique expression. It doesn't say you'll atone for your sins. It doesn't say you'll atone for your bodies. It doesn't say you atone for your mind and your heart, for your nefesh. So the Zohar asks the question, nefesh kisechta tfa, how could a soul doesn't sin? So how could a soul need kapara? How can a soul need atonement or healing? So Moses was wondering that, and in addition to that, he was also wondering, and you're telling me that we can atone, we can heal, spiritual healing, through giving a coin. God said, meditate, pray, like Yom Kippur, work it out through your heart, figure out ways to spiritually and emotionally and intellectually heal. That would make sense, but here God was saying, no, bring a coin, physical coin, and with that coin, this coin will atone, will heal your soul. So Moses wondered, how is that possible? So the Medrash answers that God then said, Zeh yitnu, here, I'll show you. Whenever it says Zeh in the Torah, it means God showed him something. What did he show him? He showed him a coin of fire, Madbeya Shalesh. He showed him a coin of fire. And when Moses saw that, he understood. It answered all his questions. The question is, what did he see? What did he understand? How did God answer the question? God answered the question by telling him, even a coin can be connected to fire. Because you'd think that, yes, the only way to really connect to the fire of the soul and heal the soul is the opposite of being anything that's material. Money is the epitome of materialism, the epitome of greed, of selfishness. That's what money represents. So you'd think, okay, the Jews had built a golden calf, and now to heal for that, one of the opinions is that the shekel came to heal that. So the way to heal now is to pray, to do tshuva, to fast, to do what we do on Yom Kippur, the exact opposite of immersion in the material. And God says, no, Madbei Shalesh, I want you to take a coin, the symbol of materialism, and even a coin can be turned into fire. If you think about it philosophically, it's a tremendous, we say, chiddush, a tremendous innovation. Why? Because it's one thing that the soul could be on fire. Spirituality could be fiery. But how could a material coin be fire? And God is saying, because I am giving it the power, that if you use it for the right purposes, even materialism itself is not an enemy. That's what I said earlier. Even the material world is not outside of the divine realm. It may be a great challenge, because when you're consumed with business and with money and so on, it turns you very selfish. It's very oriented about the here and now. There's no money in the world to come. It's all about this material success. But God said, I want fire not just in heaven, I want it on earth. And I want you to take your coin, because then you can really redeem yourself. If you only redeem yourself through spiritual activity, there's a whole part of your life that remains not lit up on fire. I want the fire, the soul's fire, to affect even your material life, even your money, even the epitome of money. And look, interestingly, of all currencies in the world, it is the currency of the United States, the land of capitalism, that was once considered the land that consumes its inhabitants, because anyone who came here off the boat in the beginning of the 20th century immediately dropped Shabbos and kosher and everything Jewish. This land of capitalism is the only country in the world that has engraved on its currency the words, "In God we trust." It's almost like insane if you think about it. Of all places, on money. Who came up with this? It's one thing to see it on a synagogue, churches, even on some public displays. Money. Every penny in your pocket, every coin you have, every dollar, every car, always in God we trust. And it seems like, such a conflict to the concept of separation of church and state. And it uses God and trust and stuff like that. Think about it. Not even getting into the dollar bill with all the symbolism of the deists that the founding fathers has all this symbolism. But just the words in God we trust. So in a sense, maybe some Americans understood the deeper secret that in the epitome of materialism, remembering the fire of God. Not that everyone takes the lesson to heart, but it's interesting it's there. Just wanted to point that out. Israel does not have it. Europe does not have it. As a matter of fact, Europe would see it as being like, the worst possible thing. Most of the world sees that God is, and people have terrorized the world in the name of God. Why would we put God on our money? Anyway, food for thought. But to go back to what we're discussing here, the point is that the Jewish message is that fire doesn't just affect us spiritually, and the material world is separated, like there's shtei reshuyos, two worlds. Yes, I have my fiery passion in spirituality in Yom Kippur and Shabbos, and when I'm doing mitzvahs, but then when I'm in the business world or I'm in the material world, I'm another human being. A Jew at home, a non-Jew in the street. Where God is saying, no, I want that fire to permeate even your material life. There's no two worlds. There's one God, Hashem Echad, at home and in the street. Work and personal life. Yom Kippur, just like a regular Wednesday night in the middle of the year. That there is no real, ultimately, compartmentalization. It's one seamless unity. So it all teaches us this idea, what I'm discussing here, that passion is one that affects all of our lives, not just the spiritual part. For me, that's been part of the challenge of the Meaningful Life Center. Teaching spiritual ideas is something that I've been trained to do. It doesn't come difficulty. The difficulty is building something in this material world that reflects that. That's a whole different story, which brings us to this space as opposed to 6th Street and so on and so forth. So our next step is to buy maybe the biggest building in Manhattan and there fuse heaven and earth and make a matbeya shalesh where we can take money and turn it into fire with your help and support. And I have no doubt it can be done, and maybe that's the greatest challenge of all, because to build spiritual edifices on mountains and in heaven, that, as I said, is an easy thing to do relatively. Maybe not for everybody, but for some of us. But to fuse the two, that's something else. So that's our next step. So look at this as we're climbing. And with that being said, I hope that every one of us here, every one of you, can find the fire in your life and manifest it in some way. Maybe it should begin spiritual, but ultimately it should also elevate even your work, even the things you do that are day-to-day activities. Because that's ultimately, remember, if you bring the fire there, then you can really also sustain it and maintain it. So maybe all be walking flames, fiery coins. A lot of money and a lot of fire. Thank you very much. Okay. Let me just say again, the class is dedicated. Maya's father is Levi ben Yehuda bat Sheva, and also Refuah Shlema for her mother. Okay, Miriam bat Sipora. And Philip's class will be when?
He said change of location. Anybody interested, please send him an email at philip@meaningfullife.com.
Philip is undercover. We don't know where he is. So you have to send him an email, and he'll tell you last second where he's doing his class, because he is afraid of the communists, right? They're coming after him. Okay, it's a joke. And the rest of us here like this. So please, you see how important it is to leave your emails, because change of plans and change of location, etc. So if you haven't left us your email, please do so we'll be able to be in touch, besides sending you the weekly thoughts and so on. And it's an honor to spend time with you and to talk down to you. That was a joke from the beginning of the class. No, that's not what I meant, but you get the idea. So everyone have a good night. Thank you.
Most of these times